Okay, cool. So, Stacey, welcome to the show, to the second episode of the DNA of Music. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited always to hear all about your ideas and be a part of them.
Yeah, but today it's all about your ideas and all about your music. So, to start off, the coolest thing that I think that you do, and you get it very well, like in the Toronto music scene, is that we have this thing of having contemporary music, pop music, and there's this combination with traditions. And we're going to talk about the traditions of Ukraine and all the other places where you work. But just to start, tell a little bit about who you are as a musician and what the kind of things that you were interested in and that you're working on. As like an overall view of that.
Yeah, that's quite a question. So definitely, I definitely feel two very different sides of myself, always as a musician and as a person. And it's about kind of finding where those two meet, or maybe they don't even have to meet. But definitely my background is, for one, I studied jazz music, contemporary music, and classical music. I have my degrees in the classical from the Royal Conservatory of Music and jazz piano performance from Humber College. So that was a music I actually discovered when I moved here from from Ukraine to Toronto when I was 11. And I remember just discovering pop music slowly, because we didn't have as much of the North American music back in Ukraine. And then I remember this one moment that kind of shaped my life now, and it was it was grade 8 open house at the high school that I was going to go to. And I remember seeing the high school band play soul, funk, and R&B and jazz. And I just remember my eyes opening up and being like, what is this music? I've never heard it. This is what I want to do. So I thought that's what I was doing. So I went in, did that at Humber professionally, got my degree. And then towards the end of that degree program, I decided to actually go back and figure out who I am, what my roots are. So actually getting back into traditional music is a very, very new thing for me. Okay. So it's something that I've only been doing it, maybe now 8 years, but still kind of new.
Well, 8 years is already. No, but I know it's like it takes a lifetime to get to everything. Yeah. No, it's cool. And so right now that I know of, you are involved in like 4 or 5 different projects that we're going to get into. And one of them is Dovira. I think we can start with that as sort of like, and then split into all those other things. Because I think you call it like electro, ethno, can you talk a little bit about the Dovira? Because it's a very interesting way of like combining
those different sides of me, and that's kind of exactly what the project is for. So it's called Dovira, which means trust in Ukrainian. So the project is about exactly finding that middle ground between the music that I went and kind of studied professionally and thought was me, because 8 years ago I released an album it was my own songwriting, and it was kind of popular R&B, jazz, pop, funk. And then once I started bringing my roots in, I discovered it's quite a challenge. It's very tricky because the music has such different roots, really, that it comes from. So it's been a challenge fusing the two, but it's the most exciting thing for me because I just love things that are different and are sometimes harder to place. But finding that sound and getting closer to finding that coherent sound has been really about discovering myself and finding me. And as I get closer to it, I feel like there's more authenticity in me, because that's kind of what I am, because I'm all about music and what I'm inspired by musically. So that's the Vira for me. It's like finding that trust in myself and also working with the incredible musicians that I get to work with. They're not Ukrainian, so I'm the one that kind of brings in the traditional element. And each one of the musicians that I work with just has such a vast knowledge of music that's their own. Mm-hmm. And so I just try to make them be themselves, their mm-hmm. authentic selves in this project. And we try to just combine all that together and mm-hmm. see what happens. And it's pretty beautiful. It's pretty cool. And so we have a lot. We have jazz sounding songs, and we have like rock and roll heavy hitters mm-hmm. with the Vira.
Yeah, and also you have some like more electronic stuff that you're playing around with.
So that's a new thing. Yeah, we've decided to go in the electronic route. And that for that project, there are only 3 of us that are part of it. So myself, Micromaniac, and Patrick O'Reilly. And they kind of do live looping and DJing and electronics that they experiment with, as I do a lot of singing, and I put my voice through some effects to make it still a live experience. Even though it's electronic, a lot of people think, that means like everything's pre-recorded and just playing you're pressing play. Yeah. But it's just a different way of creating music live, because, Patrick, for example, really works with what I'm doing vocally and how I'm improvising, and he's improvising electronically around that. So that's, we call it stage 3 of the Vira. We started out pretty folky. Then we went and we did our full album called the Vira. And it was a full band featuring a lot of incredible Toronto talent. And now we're taking it, scaling back, just the 3 of us. And it's our electronic project. So actually, May 22nd, our first song comes out.
All right. So cool. Yeah, we'll have show notes and links to all the stuff we're going to be talking about. It will be on YouTube and on the website and everything. So one of the things that I find most fascinating about like your story was that you had enough time in Ukraine, right, in Kyiv, to be infused with the culture from the place, and then
taking it for granted.
Yeah, but that's something to talk about, because we always even like, not to make about me, but I remember like wanting to get out of Brazil for a bunch of reasons. And then over time, especially it will be 10 years that I've been living in Toronto, that over time you start seeing a lot of things that are actually very cool from your own tradition. So, it seems like we're always trying to escape wherever we are. So, but to go back to this idea of what you were like, you in Ukraine. So you had like your childhood and preteen there, and then you came here, and then you had all your like most of your musical training here, and then coming back to Ukrainian traditions. Can you talk a little bit about that, like specifically that moment in your life, like of you coming from Ukraine to Toronto, and how was that experience for you?
Changing my life, so I was 11 when I came to Toronto, and I definitely didn't think much of it. I was actually pretty excited, because, it's North America, and I just thought that I would have a pool in my backyard, like right away, because that's what, on all the movies, that's what you see is a pool. So that's kind of what all I was thinking at that point. But I do remember actually going to school, which was like right away, because my mom is an Eastern European mother. And so, you're not going to take any breaks and like sit at home and learn the language. No, you're going to go right to school right away. It was just the very end of grade 5, I believe. She could have let me have the summer and then start in September, but no, I went, I think it was end of May. And I just remember it was tough. Of course, the language was tough. I remember the first tour I got of the school, and the principal said, "And this is the washroom." And I remember thinking, wash? Like, you wash yourself? Because, I knew it as water closet and stuff like that. So there were a lot of challenges, for sure. But I moved, and I was kind of in North York. And so the multiculturalism hit me right away. There were people I've never seen before, I've never interacted before. Right away, I was placed in ESL, so English second language. So my friends became, I had my best friend from Iran, and we started learning so much about each other. And it's a different kind of experience than you can get in a place like Ukraine. That's pretty much still very much, everyone has a very similar mentality, which I think can be very cool, because it's a unique place, where everyone at least more or less speaks the same language and thinks similarly, whereas I discovered right away so many different outlooks on life, and so many opinions. And I think that's what makes Toronto really cool. And that's why I'm here to stay for sure. And I'm learning that through music, with your project, Blue Dot, which I'm a part of. It's constantly like, can you share what are you bringing to the table? What is your culture? What is your culture? Like, what are you saying through your music? And just coming to a room and trying to come up with something together, which is just so beautiful. And I find that that's the Toronto thing, it's sometimes it's not as unified, but it's beautiful in that way because we are just also different, and learning from each other is beautiful.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, at least to me, this well, but it's one of those things that I'm very interested in the songs, in the border things, right? And whenever someone brings something that people haven't seen before in their own traditions, and sometimes you see that as a completely different thing, or sometimes you see that as we have our own version of that, which is it's the most amazing thing, which is why I asked about your experience coming from Ukraine at such an early age. And so let's talk a little bit about Ukraine and about the music there and the language. So we're going to go a little bit more into it. It's fascinating to me that it's a country that has such a long history, and at the same time, such a short history as actually a nation. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I find fascinating, and I don't know how you specifically navigate through that, the fact that you guys, when you're born, and depending, the part of the country, you speak Russian and Ukrainian, right? Mm-hmm. And then you switch between the two. So in terms of language, how was that for you? I know, I think in Western Ukraine, people are mainly speaking Ukrainian, and then Western Ukraine, sometimes they're mainly Russian. And people can, especially in Kyiv, they can go from one language to the other. So how is that for you, language-wise? Yeah,
so that's a really great question. And it's something that I just grew up with without thinking about it. And moving here, people ask about it. And it's different than French and English here, much different. It's literally, I'm from central Ukraine. So, from Kyiv, from the capital. So that's where you literally, your every second word, it changes. So you go Ukrainian, Russian, and then sometimes even a little bit of an English slang with the ending being in Ukrainian, which is just hilarious. Yeah. So it's very open. Nobody thinks about it. I remember really noticing it when I went back, just to visit on vacation. And, I remember watching this, channel. It was M1, kind of our Much Music, station. And so there are two hosts, and one speaks in Russian and the other in Ukrainian, and they're talking to each other. And I've been a Russian speaker actually when I was born, and it's never been a thing. We've been the most Ukrainian, and so many people have a hard time understanding that the language doesn't necessarily mean how you identify, because it's just been we've been forced. In the capital, you've been forced to change if you wanted, a good job. In the USSR, something that's gonna, create stability. You were sort of like, you just had to change to Russian. And it's a very hard thing to make a change back, especially with I was a little kid. There was enough going on for my family where they did keep speaking Russian, but they're very, very passionate about Ukraine being its own culture. And finally, after the recent events, 2004 was when we actually made a conscious decision here in Toronto to switch. So my mom and I now speak Ukrainian. And that's been something I never thought we would do as a family. And that's been quite a conscious thing. The thing that made it easier was that we had a little kid. My half-sister was born. And so that was an easy thing of like, okay, well, we have 2 languages to choose from to teach her, plus the English, so we don't want to overwhelm her. Let's go with Ukrainian. And that was, that made it easier just to really kind of show where we come from, and that we're very passionate about, Ukraine being its own thing and having its own tradition that's separate from Russia. But it's really not a problem. Like, I speak to Russian all the time, to Russian speakers, and it doesn't make them any less Ukrainian. So that's something that's like people don't understand in the media, and they say, oh, but they're Russian speakers, so they want to be part of Russian. No.
Yeah. Like the thing that I find fascinating about that is just first when I went there was they switched between, and then I was trying to learn Russian too, and then I was reading the signs or trying to decipher the signs in the subway, and then I was trying to say, but I don't know what that word means, and then my wife would say, oh, that's actually Ukrainian. Like, damn it. But it's
very confusing.
But I find it as a Brazilian, I can relate to that. The way you said it just now, that it's like whenever you think of Portuguese, our language, it's Brazilian Portuguese, but you don't really think of. Although we came from Portugal, we don't really. The cultures are actually they're similar, but they're actually very different, and there are no relationships that are embedded just because you speak Portuguese. Has nothing to do with. Being Portuguese, we're Brazilians, so it's completely different culture. But
and it almost makes you have your own thing. Like that's your quirk,
Yeah, and in that way, I think it's a little bit different than English. That now it's like lingua franca around the world, and then everybody has their own accents and ways of speaking, and many countries that take it and make it their own. That's kind of cool. So when you were in Ukraine, did you learn music there, or was it something that you learned here? Or how did that work?
I definitely started piano when I was 6. Every small Ukrainian child does. The education there is quite fantastic. It's free in a lot of ways, or not as expensive as it is here to get a decent musical education when you're small. So 6 years old, most people go to the little community music school, and I did. And I remember, my mom just said, "What do you want to play?" And I said, "Piano. Sounds good. Sounds like a nice choice." And I went in, and there was a kind of a head teacher there that does an ear training test, and I do remember her being like, she's quite gifted, and I thought, and once you hear that as a child, you kind of, once you're good at something, you know that you're good at something, you kind of make a decision to do it. Now that didn't go too well because practicing was a thing you had to do. I didn't realize that when I was 6, and eventually it became very hard to practice a lot, and I did have a period where I stopped, and it wasn't until I became a teenager and I made the decision. It wasn't my parents to actually do it, and it was songwriting that made me really decide to do it professionally and not stop. And that's when I moved here to Canada and started just writing my own little pop songs to try to emulate what I'm hearing on the radio. They were bad. They were terrible. But that with something again, I sense a spark, like a renewal, like, oh, I'm good at this. I like doing this. And from there, I just didn't stop. So I did decide to go back and finish my classical degree. It's because I can't like stop and not finish something. I need to finish. So I did go to the Royal Conservatory here, do that. And it was a lot of practicing every day. I did it. And then again, like I said, discovered jazz, totally put the classical thing aside. I had good chops, as we call it, like good technique to be able to do the jazz thing, but I had to switch my thinking totally. So jazz is a lot more about improvising. There's less, it's less about kind of reading and memorizing a certain way of doing things. Of course, in classical, there's a lot of your soul you can put into music. You can play around with dynamics and shape things that way. But jazz, it's like there's no limit. You can do whatever you want. And that was an exciting and a scary thing that made me really, really decide to do it for life. And then, of course, discovering the traditional, it was easier to do it with a jazz training, because with traditional music too, there's a lot where you're playing with an ensemble and other people. So you need to have a really good ear that's open to really playing with people, not just being in your own little box, kind of doing what you practice. No, you need to be like open to changing things up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned about jazz, right? So to me, it's a whole black art. Like I'm more into started with like Arabic music and then Turkish and Persian and then world music, and now very fascinated about music from Ukraine, Poland, and all those places. But
whole new territory.
Yeah. But for me, jazz is still like music that musicians like, but I'm not really like into it. Can you give a little bit of like a primer of what jazz is? Not what jazz is, but like what it appeals to you, what kind of things are, because I want to ask you later about how that served as a gateway drug to all the traditional stuff. But like, what's your take and your appeal to jazz?
To especially to non-jazz musicians? That's a good question. And it's funny because the other weekend, just to take a step aside, I also run an event company where in Toronto here, where we are really focused on giving musicians sustainable work. So work in private events and weddings. And we kind of have a really good system worked out for that, where we really try to take care of the musician and provide clients with something that's really, really top notch and super pro. Again, to help this whole industry and this whole Toronto music scene that we're talking about. So there is a lot of kind of popular and jazz music that people ask for, and this lady called a week ago, and she said, I have my grandpa, he's turning 90, and I would really love a jazz piano player. And I was like, cool, I have just the perfect guy for you. Let's do it. She's like, yeah, I also have a question. What is jazz? So that was really funny. And it's like, how do you answer that? Because it's kind of it's really the start of North American music, but also it's kind of the spark of everything. Like, I think everything really came from Africa, including us, everyone. And so this music that made its way to North America, it really shapes everything, shapes our current history totally, because it's about the rhythm, first and foremost, of Africa, of this kind of birthplace of everything, and then it's been taken it's evolved, right, a lot. And that's why people, non-musicians, just sometimes they'll go to a jazz show and they've never really understood it, and they just go like, I don't know what's going on, but all the musicians are like tapping their head and going, yeah, man, this is serious stuff. I think the reason that it does have this edge of it that's maybe more, seems exclusive, is because it is such a, there's a lot of, how can I say it, mental capacity and a lot of yourself that you can put into the music, and you can really take it very far in terms of just once you have the knowledge of how to work with harmony, work with rhythm, and make it your own, you're improvising on the spot. So that's what the jazz musicians are reacting to if they have an ear for like, oh, that guy just did a flat 7 going to like a flat 2. So if you have an ear for it, yeah, you're going to be really drawn to what it is exactly technically that they're doing. But if you take a step back, there's so much, you don't need that kind of training, you don't need that kind of ear to hear it. And if you're finding this stuff, the current modern stuff, hard to listen to, go back to the 20s, to the 30s, go back to Louis Armstrong, and I think everyone can listen to that and really feel something in their soul. And I think that's what jazz is. It's that like very tribal, very human feeling that I think is in all of us. And I think you can find that you just maybe need to search for music that's a little bit maybe older before it got so evolved, you know? And then perhaps you'll have more of an ear for the current stuff. And then what Coltrane did with the music, and he just kind of took it further, you know? And so your ear might just find a spot that you really like and stay there for a bit, and then eventually your ear will just evolve, but you don't have to have the training.
I never thought of jazz that way, but I think it was with me the first time I listened to Arabic music that had all the scales that are not like major, minor, like the regular scales in the West. And there will be another episode that we're going to talk at length about that kind of stuff. But I remember like, you have to adapt your ear to hear that. And even to me now, major, minor scales sort of sound very vanilla.
They can sound boring.
Like, not boring, but like, oh, that's cute. That's a minor. How about like Hijaz or like other kinds of... But it's interesting how it gets... It's like... The analogy I made to a friend of mine the other day, that he was like, why are you into all this world music stuff, right? And then I said, oh, it's like as if you had only eaten pasta all your life, and suddenly you are presented to this buffet of food from all over the world. It will take a little while for you to get the taste of certain things, especially when you haven't explored it or you weren't born with it. But as you do, your mind gets open to a lot of different opportunities and
totally. You just have to let your mind do that. You just have to expose yourself to all this music. And it's interesting about what you said about Maqam and like the scales, the Arabic scales that are much different than what we have here in the West. That there are also a lot of similarities, and we talked about that a lot with you, just finding the similarities between these different cultures that are just like, whoa, how did that happen? Like, so it really, to me, it's the same, like the Arabic scales and the jazz, because the jazz, especially because it comes from the blues, that very, very basic, kind of like, here's my soul, here's what it's yearning for. And the blues, as we know, everybody talks about that blue note, you know? So, I guess just to simply explain to non-musicians, you know, and I'm singing this in a Ukrainian way, but, that third, you know, that in classical music, it's either minor or major. Da, 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 da. It's somewhere in between in Maqam, but same with blues. And it's because it all comes from the same place. So it's just got transformed differently, got evolved differently. But the starting point is always that slightly flat third. It's not quite it's not quite in tune because it's just it's nature, right?
Yeah.
It's the way it's supposed to be in nature, which is somewhere in between the E flat and the E on the piano, which we can't play on the piano.
Yeah, which is like a tempered instrument, right? Which is they decided these are the notes we're going to play, right? Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then for you, so like from jazz, that you said, I want to get into the traditional music, like of Ukraine and probably other places. So let's try to get a little bit into that. And then do you remember how that started? Was it like a song, a decision? You woke up one day and said, I want to go back to Ukrainian songs, or how did that work?
So for me, it was definitely hearing the vocal stuff, the choral Ukrainian polyphonic singing stuff. It's funny, I did grow up with it. I heard it, but it's in Ukraine. It was known as the village singing. And so that wasn't really something that you wanted to aspire to. You wanted to be a classical musician. That's like if you're trained, if you have X amount of years to show on your diploma, then you're a good musician. But that's kind of the not everybody, but there's a little bit of that mentality. And so the village stuff is it's out of tune. It's for the peasants. It means, you have less income. And it wasn't really understood as an art form, except for some people. And those people were the young students in the 90s that realized these grandmas that are singing this stuff in the village, they're going to die soon. We need to go and preserve this. So my dad did a little bit of this, and they went and they grabbed field recordings of these grandmas. And of course, this has happened before the 90s for sure. But it's just something that we kind of heard a little bit sometimes. And when I finally decided to really revisit it here in Toronto, it was I started through YouTube. I'm trying to remember what was the spark that drew me in. I think it was a random YouTube search. I think it was just, and then I clicked on something and like, whoa, wait a second. First of all, it brings back nostalgia. It brings back those sounds I heard. Second of all, is just, what is this? This is beautiful. What is that way that they're producing the sound, And it's just because it's so real and so basic. And again, to me, totally blues and that type of singing is like the same thing. It's just like, here I am. I'm working on a field, and I need something to make this better. And that is song, and that's how they would communicate, and also express their own woes and feelings that they were going through, and I just felt that. And so I went and there was I Googled, like, is there anything in Toronto or anybody else that's into this? And I remember discovering Kolyskova Collective, and now I'm a part of them. I know the girls, they're fantastic. Young women and men bringing up these traditions in a modern Toronto world. And so they were putting on a workshop, and I went to go to the workshop, and it was Nastasia that was doing it back then. She was the original singer in Lemon Bucket Orchestra.
Okay.
8 years ago or something. And she kind of introduced me to hear some more recordings, hear some more field recordings, go and check this stuff out. And I just started really listening to it a lot and trying to emulate it. Never thought I could sing that way because I was a jazz singer. I was kind of like a Nora Jones, like very soft singing. And then one day I discovered, I was like, whoa, I have this. It's 5 times louder. It's a very strong, piercing. People call it nasal. It's just a very piercing kind of quality that is really very human.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's cool. No, it's cool. Yeah. About that, like, we're going to get into now a little bit about specifically like Ukrainian music. And to me, I remember the first time I saw you singing like Ukrainian music. I had already seen some people like in Toronto, like in some people from the Lemon Bucket Orchestra and Kolyskova Collective and other places. It's like, oh wow, yeah, I had the same impression. It's like, whoa, this is a different way of singing. It has this power. It has this, and it's raw in a way, but at the same time, there is some, at least to me, there are some hints of a very ancient, but some sort of like ancient sophistication and simplicity, the way that they do it. And then I remember seeing you saying, it's like, oh wow, like how can she produce this kind of sound?
She's so little.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that then I wanted to maybe even demonstrate a little bit of that, like later on. As you know, we're going to like do a little like demonstration of a song that is important to you, and we're going to get into that. But you mentioned this idea of the polyphonic sound, right? So this is basically, from what I understand, it's you have many people that they are singing and they are complementing the melodies that are happening, and they're doing like sometimes different kinds of melodic lines, or they're doing sometimes the same, and you have a little personality. How can you talk a little bit about the structure of this kind of quote-unquote village music from Ukraine?
Yes, so it's different than the choral music that we're used to hear, because the choral music here has a lot of harmony. We talk about harmony a lot. And so I guess the simplest way of describing it is things are kind of built in harmony in Western music, and it stays that way for the most part. Like there's a soprano that's going to sing the top part, and whereas with polyphonic singing, it's a little bit more about the main melody, and things do go into harmony at some point, but it always comes back. And that's the one thing that I've noticed that really struck a chord with me. No pun intended. It always comes back to the tonic, which is the main note. So it's like coming home. You know, it starts somewhere, it goes somewhere crazy, and it always comes back. No matter how many singers you have, they're gonna sing the last note. Like doshechka, biля mostechka, always comes back to the first note that it started. So that's kind of the difference with polyphonic singing. It's like branches and offshoots, and it comes back. But you could probably find a better Wikipedia definition.
No, for sure. Like in these conversations, it's more like given like how you touch this culture and this tradition, and how you interpret and how you use it. And thank you for the little demonstration of and that's like little like part that you're saying. That's that's a Ukrainian song, right? Specifically, this one that you just sang, it's sung in Ukrainian, right?
That's right. Yeah, so that's a spring song, a spring and wedding song for, I believe, Central Eastern Ukraine. I'm definitely not a specialist. This is still a new thing for me, but beautiful song that kind of is about the revival and about springtime, the time to get married, because that's what pretty much all the village songs were about. It's like time to get married. There were funeral songs, spring songs, and songs that have to do with the different celebrations, winter time. But it's very much, they're very much like catalogs of songs. These are the ones you sing at this time, and these are the ones you sing at this time, which is kind of funny. So
yeah, and it's funny when you say that, because we actually have sort of like that kind of thing too. like we have songs for birthdays, for weddings, as you mentioned, the Stereo Flower, your company, like it's literally like there will be a certain repertoire, and there will be the top 50 that will be sung in different, and I guess
like when
songs.
Journey wrote Don't Stop Believing, I don't know if they knew, but that was just going to be for weddings eventually. But
and then there are like Stairway to Heaven songs to learn on the guitar, right? And hopefully with this show, people will get inspired to take a look at these other traditions that I remember seeing. One of the most beautiful, powerful songs that I heard from. I'll put link on show notes for the on the repertoire. There was this very sad song about. It's all innuendo about like betrayal, and it's a story like there is this Cossack, there's this Ukrainian warrior, and he goes to the house of this woman, but she's basically lamenting, oh, you have this family, you have your wife, but it's sort of like a forbidden love song, and they relate to a bird. And I remember I heard the song, and I basically felt all those things. And then suddenly, that's what the song is about. And then I remember like goosebumps, camera can't see. But it's, I remember like, oh wow, like it was so powerful. And again, sung in a way that it's absolutely unique to that area of the world. And that actually brings me to my next, segue, which is, so you start doing the Ukrainian songs and learning all this beautiful way of singing and projecting your voice in a different way. And then you found songs from other places as well, right? Like, so you started doing like, another project we can talk about, which is Blisk, right? That you have. And then you have these songs which are like Polish, Russian, and this other part. So can you talk a little bit about how your interest from Ukraine grew to other regions?
To Eastern Europe and beyond? Yeah, that's a very good question. Because I just want to make my life harder. So, why not try to sing this stuff in different languages that I don't know how to speak? So that came from definitely, again, just expanding my mind through YouTube searches and so on. But I remember a moment where I heard Macedonian. It was the Macedonian stuff and the Bulgarian stuff that really drew me in or out to discover more. And then I found some girls that are also into this stuff in Toronto. And that's Ekaterina, Stefania, and Evelina from Blisk. And that's a group that takes Eastern European and beyond vocal songs, and we add a little bit of percussion and dance to them. So we really like to expose people to these sounds and how they're different. So, we just talked about Ukraine and that very open throat type of singing that's very vast, but also there's, Macedonia, and that it's like very similar, but there's more rhythm. I don't know. That's just the simplest way to explain it. Of course, there's all kinds of stuff. But the rhythm of that stuff really drew me in because it's more interesting. There's a lot of stuff in 7 and in 9. And so it's a less kind of straight thing that we're used to here, which is 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But there you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it just has such a, again, to me, it's like more real way of moving even, because if you look at nature, nothing is straight, nothing is square. Everything has different sides to it that all balance out. So that's what drew me into that stuff. And then the Bulgarian stuff, which is different again from all, especially from Ukrainian, because the harmonies they're more dense. So there's a lot of what we call seconds. So instead of that coming back to that tone that I just spoke about with the Ukrainian stuff, there's a lot of close intervals that create these cool beats. So somebody's singing one note and somebody's singing a note right above that, and it creates a very
pulsation,
cool, pulse kind of. So I heard it and really, really wanted to get into that. And again, that's a very new thing. So there's a lot to learn. It's a slightly different technique also. And we are just doing our best with trying to pay tribute to those traditions while exposing people like us 8 years ago when we never really heard this stuff, and just having other people have those goosebumps moments that you just talked about. It's the most beautiful gift because it just makes them more interested in the world, and maybe they'll go and Google this stuff, and maybe they'll go and open their ears and minds a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's fascinating. So now that you went from like classical, then you went to jazz, then traditional in the in Ukrainian sense, and then to all these other traditions that you're exploring. And I know, like even with me and with other groups around Toronto, you're exploring even like Middle Eastern influences and things.
That's been really fun.
Yeah. And what do you, in terms of like, given your journey so far with this, what are like some common elements and some things that are like very distinct from like the Ukrainian traditional music, or to your eyes, like what's your perceptions in terms of you talked a little bit about Macedonia and the rhythms that are like in sevens and nines. Is basically, for people that don't know, this is basically you count cycles through music: 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3. So in Western music, most of it, today at least, it's either you count to 2, 1 2 1 2, or 1 2 3, or 1 2 3 4. And whenever you go to these other places around the world, you have sixes in Persia, you have sevens all over Balkans, and the nines in Turkey, and everything in between. And when you go to India, you have 128 beat things, and so. Rhythm in Macedonia was one thing. What's like in terms of like similarities and differences between these traditions that you're exploring?
The stuff that I'm exploring now, it's actually interesting because it starts with differences, and then in the end, it's like, okay, everything is just, we're all one, and there are so many similarities. That's what I find. What else is there? Even, with the projection and the way that we were just talking about that sound, right? And a lot of people say that it's different. And everyone asks, like, how do you do that? How do you do that? But really, I find that as I go and learn more, I end up just discovering really more about the human voice, and that in the end, even in classical and opera, all these techniques exist. And in pop, it's like, okay, you want a little bit more resonance here, so you go from here. And you really like this part up. You want more open, kind of breathy air, you open this up, and you really draw from here. It's all the same. It's all the same technique. It's just that you're using a little bit more of one than the other. So in this singing, it's really all about, again, like opera, opening it up here, making sure you have good support. And then just aiming it slightly different with the resonance, the frontal resonance. So that's been interesting. And of course the Arabic stuff and the maqam, totally new for me. But thank you to you for exposing me to that. That's been quite a journey, and especially. I thought I had good ear training coming from Humber and my training, but this is a whole other thing. Yeah. It's like you are hearing all the notes in between the semitones, and this one is half flat and this one is half sharp, and it's just crazy. And I'm just starting to hear it, and it's crazy realizing that our instruments here, our Western instruments, just don't allow us. To even hear those sounds. Like the piano, you can't play in between the notes. Now they're starting to, so there's a synthesizer that's out, the Rolly keyboard, where you can actually, depending on where you place your finger, on the key, you can make it half flat.
Yeah,
That's a new thing.
Yeah, though you would like to see to hear that, because in the especially in like Arabic bands, they're using a lot of they have in the Middle East, they have specific kinds of keyboards that they do. Basically, you can say which makam, which like scale is going to be, and then they switch those like around. So and then whenever you're doing like vibratos with that little like knob thing, that you can sort of get those sounds.
You can sort of get those sounds. Yeah, you can get close. You can get pretty close these days. Yeah.
And but then for you, like that's one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is, we were talking about voice for a while, and then, but you are also like an accomplished like keyboard player. So can you talk a little? I know you played piano for a long time, and I know you play keyboards in some of your projects. And you also play the accordion, which we'll talk about in a bit. And also, you played the fantastic 80s
guitar.
Guitar. Yeah. So, can you talk a little bit about your journey exploring like keyboard instruments and how they relate to your singing and to music?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That the journey led me to the accordion. So the accordion is definitely a new thing of mine. So I've been doing piano, since I was 6, long time. So I feel a lot more at ease and more proficient at that. But this instrument, discovering, maybe it came from me being literally small and not being able to carry a piano or even a keyboard around everywhere. I did do a lot of gigs. About 3 years ago, no, even a year ago, I kind of made a choice to take a step back from private and wedding gigs a little bit, because I've played a couple hundreds of those and a lot on the keyboard. And I did actually have some physical problems. Some of it was not so much at the playing of it, but carrying it around gig to gig. That was became a little bit of an issue. And so actually one of the things that drew me to the accordion was that it's more portable in the size. But once I started playing it, it was like coming back home, because the nostalgia kicked in of those songs that I heard growing up. And it's such a different instrument than piano, even though there are piano keys here on the one side. But it's a reed instrument, and the left side is quite different. So, this side makes the melodies.
Can you pick it up just to show in more or less? So, I mean, people will have seen accordions everywhere, probably. It's one of the quote-unquote folk instruments that is the most like popular one everywhere. But let's see what it does, like in terms of sounds, like just because you were talking, like just to show a little bit.
So definitely, the right hand is more familiar to people because it is like a piano instrument, but we know that a piano, you hit a note and a mallet hits a string, so it's more a percussive kind of instrument, whereas this is reed-based, and it's really based on you pulling out and in and the air coming to the notes. So you can really use it as a voice. So if we just look at the right hand, if you just play a note, you can, it's like taking a breath in, and you do literally have to. So because this doesn't extend forever, at some point you do have to take a breath. And that's what makes it so real. Whereas with piano, you can play forever and not stop moving your fingers. But here as you come to the end, so it won't be completely continuous. But the left hand is totally different because you make your chords or your kind of foundation lower notes, your lower support notes with the left hand, and it's totally different than the piano because the notes are not all lined up in a row, but they're in fifths, as we call them. So the closest two notes are actually quite far apart. They're a fifth apart. And that, of course, actually makes so much sense because so much folk music, again, from all over the world, comes from the 1 and the 5. So the 1 is where you always end up. And the 5 is what draws you back home. You wouldn't want to end here. You would want to come back. So that's been really cool to discover and kind of to almost go back because I'm not as proficient at the accordion, but to be able to take such a step back and play very simple chords that are the foundation of everything has been, now I look back at jazz music and all this other stuff and I hear all that folk stuff in there, just from playing the accordion. So, and of course it's more portable, so I can bring it around to gigs much easier. And the guitar is the other thing that I thought, you know what? I do a lot of stuff. Why not do this and try to pull it off? It is more portable. It was popular, in the 70s and 80s, and now it's like a cheesy kind of thing that it's that a lot of people look at it as, but I'm trying to bring it back and make it cool again.
Cool. So, on one of our next shows, we must bring it back.
Guitar, yeah.
You got it. But thanks for showing the accordion. It's I think one of the other things that the accordion can do that is so interesting from a world music point of view is that it's present in so many cultures, and they're played like differently depending on where you are. Yeah. They have different sizes and different shapes and different things. But they, as you said, like with capabilities of like this breathing and the intensity that you can do, you can be rhythmic and you can be the melody, and you can be drone sounds. You can do all sorts of things. Exactly.
So it works in like Indian music with the drone. It kind of can simulate a harmonium instrument, and then the Arabic stuff. Although it's tricky, of course, when you're getting into the half tones and stuff, because there are some accordions made for that. Obviously, not the Eastern European one.
Yeah.
Or the German one, but the Brazilian stuff too, right?
Yeah.
And that's when they really use it in a cool rhythmic way that I would love to also get into eventually, because they really kind of almost use it as a percussion instrument. In the left hand, there's so much rhythm. It's
cool.
Just everywhere.
Yeah, I just wanted to people to like just to see what I found very interesting, that you found this instrument through your journey in world music. It's
even though really it's kind of like going back.
That's a good point. It's like sometimes when you discover something new that you think it's new, but it's coming back home. It's like it was there already. Like it's
and that's life, isn't it? It's like life is all about coming back home.
And great. So now I think like to finish off, and again I wanted to thank you for being with me today and talking about geeking out about music in front of a camera, and I wanted to ask you first before we do that, where people should go to check out your stuff. We have links and bling bling and everything, but where do you want people to go to check your stuff out?
So right now it's stacey.com, and Stacey is spelled Stacey, and then another Y, because my last name is very long. It's Yerofeyeva. And that is a tribute to my dad, who was a fantastic musician in Ukraine, and he was the musical part of me, and where I get my talent from. He has unfortunately passed away, but I do want to, try to keep that name, even though it's hard for some to pronounce. So right now it's stacey.com. And the song that I will sing will be one that he has sung to me many, many times in the past. But I also want to take that even a step further, and I'm currently going through a transition and perhaps a name change back to my original name, which was Nastasia. Nastia. And that comes from Nastasia, and that's where Stacey comes from. So when I moved here when I was 13, I didn't want people to call me Nasty. So I changed it to Stacey. But that was something that I just kind of made up when I was 11. So I really am recently definitely thinking about going back to Nastasia. So my website might change, but you can definitely find me if you just search for Stacey Y for now, and then we'll keep you updated on that.
And we will find the Vera Blisk, the Balkan Electro Project, Polka Village Band. Yeah, like we have
those are going to be on there. Yeah, Stereoflavor.
Yeah,
all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
and that's great. Yeah, thanks for that. And it's very interesting that you mentioned about the idea of like the identity and name change and the like stage name. I mean,
and that's too, and that's also about going back, right? It's very interesting how life works. But
that thing, I think even on the name search, it's one of those things that we are always at this edge between being completely like understood what that name means or everything, but at the same time you want to show more treasures and show more things that people can know. Maybe they will be able to say Yerofeyeva, right? Over time.
Exactly. So I kind of am a slash artist right now. Nastasia Y, Nastasia Yerofeyeva, Stacey Y. You'll find me.
Yeah.
Sofita, even.
No, that's cool. So now let's just talk a little bit about this song that, as you know, like with this project, the DNA of Music, I'm trying to showcase a little bit of the traditional music that inspired your journey through world music, and at the same time something that makes it personal, something that is that puts you in this path. So then I asked musicians to come up with either songs that are traditional that they heard, or something that they're working on now, or like whatever interesting. And then you mentioned that there is the song that you wanted to talk. Can you talk a little bit about that song?
Yeah. When you asked me, I thought, when am I going to perform? And for some reason, this song came to mind for sure. So it means a lot to me because it was a song that my dad used to sing to me as a lullaby all the time. So I do have memories of that being very little. And it's kind of like a soundtrack to my childhood. The song was written by his band Rutenia that he was a part of. And so this band was... he was doing some badass stuff when he was, 1989, fall of the USSR, he's singing these, like, patriotic songs. First of all, singing in Ukrainian, on purpose, with a lot of symbolism. So, this song, talks about, a little Cossack. So Sleep Little Cossack, which is just so beautiful because Cossack is such just a symbol of Ukrainian, a Cossack was a Ukrainian warrior, and it's just such a symbol of our identity. And even the Ukrainian national anthem says, like, we are, let's show them that we are free and that we come from a Cossack way of living. And those are the rebel fighters that were really just for keeping their own traditions and cultures alive. And it's a beautiful song that is just for kids, and it's a lullaby. And it became kind of popular, and some people actually think of it as a folk song. It's written in a folk way, but I actually know that it's by Rutenia, and it was sung by my dad, who has the most beautiful voice, of course, out of anybody on this planet. So it means a lot. And the one verse that I really love, to try to translate it, it says, sleep little Cossack, one day you will go, you will be a warrior, you will go to battle, and you will realize that there are not many of you, but even less of them. So that's kind of powerful. And I think it symbolizes, just like in a very nonchalant way, where you come from. Like, be proud of where you come from and be a warrior. And to me, that means through music. So, I'm not literally out there fighting on the streets, but I think that my way of being able to translate emotion to people is so important. And that's like a battle that I'm fighting currently, just getting people just more in touch with their emotions. Even if I'm singing a song in a different language that they don't understand, like you said, trying to get people to the core of the song and the meaning of it without necessarily translating it, I think is so important for us to really understand that we are all one. We all have these feelings. We all have these emotions. And in the end, no matter the war and the conflict that's going on, it's important for us to realize that we are one. And that I think it ties in beautifully to your project, this DNA project. It's just so important to hold on to our cultures and what makes us different, but realize that we're all fighting the same battle.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really cool. Yeah. It's interesting to hear from your own perspective. It's stuff that I've been struggling, trying to do the best way that I can to showcase that we are all from everywhere, and that if we share our cultures, we all get first less likely to kill each other, right? And at the same time, more likely to get the best that everything in the world has to offer and lift all boats in a way.
And communicate about our differences and our
for sure, And it's one of those things that I always find if we have just stayed with one specific place and not share what we're doing, it would be invitation for chaos in a way, right?
That's what causes war. Yeah.
And which is why I like this idea that you were talking about of having the music be, even if you can't understand, but if you can convey meaning through music, it will pierce through that sometimes wall that is artificial that we create among each other. And this dichotomy between keeping your own thing and at the same time sharing it with the world, which I think you're doing it beautifully. So
thank you.
Once again, thank you so much for being here. So now we're going to listen to the song.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pedro.
My pleasure.
Спи, маленький козачок, повернися на бочок. Спи, синочку, мама засинає. Спи, козаче, кінь твій чекає. Люлі-люлі, юбай-юбай, завтра прийде Миколай, принесе тобі в дарунок золотих пісень пакунок, принесе тобі в дарунок золотих пісень пакунок, а в зимову тиху ніч ми поїдемо на січ, кошовий нам дасть різдвяний хрящ. що вина дасть різдвяний пряний. Спи, козаче, більше рано, ще малі твої гетьмани, а як підеш в бій свій перший, мало нас, а вас ще менше. А як підеш в бій свій перший, мало нас, а вас ще менше. Спи, маленький, треба спати. Вовчик спить і зайчик брати. Грає синій водограй, казка лється через гай. Люля-люляй, баю-бай. Грає синій водограй, казка лється через гай. Люляй-люляй, баю-бай. Люляй-люляй, баю.